clap to each one of them. First of all, we have David Lee. Can we get the slide with the... David Lee with Refactor Capital. Then we have Frank Lee from Facebook. And Anthony Cho from Providence. And Rich Dunn from BAM Ventures. So before we start, I'd like you to give us a quick intro of yourself and what's the latest and greatest you're working on these days.
So my name is David Lee. I'm chairman of Refactor Capital, a seed venture capital firm based in Northern California. Before that, I ran a firm called SV Angel, also based in Northern California. What I'm working on? My current job in venture capital, investing in founders, and I think we'll sort of dive into different topics. And also, I'm a little annoyed that we sat Frank and I together because we are literally wearing the same shirt, not just a uniform. So, we love to switch seats, but that's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. We've all dressed about the same.
The shitty thing with that is I'm Danny DeVito in this situation. So frankly, industry lead for Facebook and Instagram. My primary role, I run our advertising team on the West Coast, predominantly for e-commerce advertisers.
So I'm Anthony Cho. I founded a growth stage investment firm solely focused on omni-channel consumer brands in 2017. So I don't do startups per se, so these guys are much better at that. So when a brand gets to the kind of awkward, gangly adolescent phase that I like to call it, that's when I like to get to.
Hi everyone, Richard Judd from BAM Ventures. I think I know most of you here, so thanks again for coming and supporting this. I'm a co-founder and managing director of BAM Ventures. We're an early stage seed fund. We focus mainly on consumer or consumer tech. We're on fund number 2, and we'll probably be in market to raise fund number 3 Q1 next year.
Okay, thank you. Let me start with David. So I met David, I won't say how long, I just don't want to put age and time together. But when I was doing my own startup, and back then Facebook was just about getting started. And David, you've seen all these companies start and invested in most, if not all of them, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Pinterest, on and on and on. And it's been like 10 plus years since all of that social media wave started, and we are here today. Can you tell us a little bit about how you see the space having evolved until today, and what you think will happen the 5-10 years from now? A little bit of crystal ball.
Yeah, I have no idea, and I say that honestly because no one would have, it's old saying, no one would have ever thought the next Microsoft would be a search engine. No one would have ever thought that the next search engine was a social network. And no one would have ever thought the next social network was a car company. And so I am confident that there will be something. But what I can say is that if I had a prediction, I'd say that whatever's next will touch the real world even more so. By that I mean, if you look at Google and Facebook are pure software companies, and then arguably Uber and Airbnb were the next ones. And those companies touch the real world, and those were cars and houses. And I think whatever's next will probably be integrated even more into our real world lives. So it just won't be bits, it will be atoms. And you see that now in terms of the startups that are being funded. WeWork has gotten a lot of derision, but directionally I think the idea was correct. And so I do think that you'll see more and more founders sort of leveraging that. Beyond that, it's hard for me to say what the next consumer trend is, because I think we underestimate what we just went through, which was a 10-year run everybody getting online with a mobile phone. And that creates an enormous tailwind of momentum where a lot of new companies are created. I don't really see that happening for the next 3 or 4 years at least. But those are the two trends. I think more integration into the real world. And well, the second trend I probably would think about is I think the younger generation, they share, not only they share everything, but they're creating, everybody's a creator. And I think that on steroids is going to be something that's interesting. You see something like overtime for high school athletes. And so I think you'll see more and more of those types of startups.
When we were backstage, we were talking a little bit about, especially Anthony, how you used to invest in, correct me if I'm wrong, online businesses that wanted to go offline, or the other way, offline businesses that wanted to go online, and now the opposite trend is happening where online is going offline. And obviously you invest at a much later stage traditionally when these companies are more mature. But can you tell us what you see from your perspective as well a little bit?
Yeah, so it's just different periods of time, different technologies, different channels allow you to reach your end audiences in different ways. And so very clearly over the last 10 years, but especially over the last 5, the vast majority of brands that I talk to start their lives digitally first. If you're an entrepreneur and you want to start a brand, why wouldn't you start with that channel? And so what I've always known is that once you get to a certain scale as a brand, if you're targeting a certain audience or a tribe, as we like to call it, being single channel is always limiting, regardless of what channel you're starting. So I think my thesis is around all these online brands that scale early on in their life. Life gets a lot more complex when you have to start opening your own stores or perhaps mailing catalogs. Now you're dealing with wholesale partners like Nordstrom. It gets a lot more complex, and we want to help address that complexity. The way we're doing it is a little bit unique because we're starting with a very data-oriented approach. Because one of the advantages that you have when you start digitally first is you sit on a lot of customer information and behavior. And we try to help companies map that out. Because unlike other channels, like if you start in retail or wholesale, you don't have that same richness of information. So we utilize that, help map out strategies for companies on a channel-by-channel basis around trying to stay true to who their tribe is. Because in our view, that's the way you scale a brand without losing the authenticity. Consumers don't care about the channel as much anymore, as long as you're authentic. But to do that, you have to stay authentic to narrower audiences in a wide variety of channels, and it always gets complex. So I've never been about there's going to be one single channel and one single channel only that wins. In certain categories that makes sense. I think for brands though, people want to touch, feel, and consume brands in every channel. And so I've always been channel agnostic. It's just my strategy is now tailored to how brands are typically starting their journey.
Frank, given all these changes in trends and also the omni-channel sort of approach, how is Facebook adapting and helping both startups at the beginning stage of entrepreneurship all the way to becoming the big companies that Provenance and Bats and Go IPO and become legendary companies?
Yeah. Well, so you're absolutely right. There is an evolution in terms of the partnership we have with various brands, stemming from early stage, like a lot of the companies that we saw earlier today. And you bring up a really interesting point, Anthony, in terms of we're seeing some of the later stage companies that grew up online. We're actively co-creating plans to help them diversify. Because quite frankly, if you're a brand, and let's just say you get to $100 million and you're 70% of your marketing budget went to Facebook and 20% went to Google and then miscellaneous for everything else, that's just kind of an uncomfortable position just as a business, and we're really trying to think about long-term sustainability and partnership. And so we've actually had a lot of conversations with some of our clients, Fabletics, one as an example, or even Movement Watches in the local area. You know, they've actively looked at podcasts or billboards and offline as a way to kind of elevate the brand, because once you work with a Facebook or a Google, and you exhaust all your target demographic, your perfect demographic, then it's about trying to kind of create your personality and expose that to a broader set of cohorts. And Facebook and Google are great ways to do it, don't get me wrong, but there's other channels. So television, podcasts, it's very much part of the playbook that we see happen, rinse and repeat, for those that stand out versus like the sea of sameness of all the other kind of digital upstarts.
Rich, you and obviously Brian Lee have seen a lot of these big brands again start from zero to become multi-billion-dollar companies. Shoedazzle with Kim Kardashian, Honest Company with Jessica Alba, now Artist Sport with Kobe Bryant. Thank you.
Don't forget
LegalZoom, yeah, with
Robert Shapiro.
Robert Shapiro. Is having how important is having a celebrity or an influencer involved in the team? Is that critical to a startup or mega company success?
You know, I think back then it was. I think it's less so now. There are so many different variables, right? Is it the right celebrity speaking the right message about the right product? We always see celebrity associations as a shortcut to marketing, right? Like if you find the right celebrity who is able to talk about the product in a very authentic way, it's going to save you in terms of raw dollars because you won't have to beat someone over the head about how great your product is, right? It comes from someone you trust. There's authenticity there. So in many ways, the calculus is if we work with a celebrity, does that make sense from a fundraising standpoint? Because now we won't have to plow 3 million, 4 million, 5 million, give it to Frank over on Facebook, and instead we can use 1 million, do the same ad, but get better penetration and conversion through it. So less is the day about, wow, we have an A-star actor who wants to be part of this brand and we should get him because everybody knows his or her name, but more so like, let's be thoughtful about the celebrity partnership. What does this mean from a company standpoint? What does it mean in terms of it hitting the marketing bottom line?
Again, another reason why I love LA is because here is where both content, entertainment, media, and so on is number one, but also commerce. We have the largest port in the United States here, and more than 1/3 of items that are enter the United States coming through the port of LA and are distributed through the US. And so I do believe that this is one of the most strategic cities, not only in the US, but globally. And as it relates to content and the convergence with commerce, and David, you mentioned a little bit about creatives. And we see companies like AT&T who are becoming everything, right? They're vertically integrating from all the way from telecom to just owning the whole entertainment space, and then commerce companies also getting into entertainment. Is that what's going to happen? Initially, it felt like startups were each going to be experts on verticals, and now as they become big, they're becoming mega companies like the Jebels in Korea. Do you think that's where we're headed again, where everything is becoming one big company that owns everything, or do startups have a chance to thrive in the midst of it?
I actually think it's the opposite. I mean, I think, there's a lot of chatter right now about the consolidation in tech right now among Amazon, Facebook, Google, and so forth. But I actually think the opportunity for a lot of young entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs just starting are all these businesses that they may not be as large as Amazon, but they have a really healthy, profitable, viable, valuable business that serve a tribe, as Anthony said, that serve a certain segment. And though, you look at some of the brands right now, I think, 20 years ago, if you asked us, what are people wearing, Frank and me notwithstanding, everybody would be wearing, well, actually 20 years ago, everybody would be wearing the 3 or 4 same brands. Now, probably all the brands are different. And I think that's a huge opportunity. So, at least in the area of commerce, I actually see the other way. I don't see a lot of consolidation. Maybe in the distribution channel and how it gets to the consumer, and I think that's where Amazon is such a powerful force. But in terms of creating something that people want, I actually think it's going to be more distributed with it may be a different opportunity for investors. I think the last 15 years, it's about, you want to find a company that is this so-called unicorn, or that is a 10, 20, $30 billion company. And it didn't matter at what stage you invested. I think for a lot of these other companies, it's really going to matter when you invest. You really want to invest earlier because the outcome may be very different than something like an Amazon.
Anthony, you want to?
Yeah, I think it's the thing that this question brings up for me is that when you talk about all that consolidation, I think everybody's realizing that the customer is the asset, and how do you monetize that? So I see that pretty vividly in the data sets that we look at. So I don't know, we've looked at approximately, call it 10 million consumer profiles at this point. And what we see lighting up in brands over and over and over again is about 17, 18% of the US population. It's not as broad as you would think. And to me, when I look at it, it looks very similar to a Nordstrom customer, maybe 5 to 7 years younger. And what it makes me think about is there's this sliver of the US population that is participating very actively and leaning into brand choice. And a lot of that is driven by income. It's not solely driven by the top 20% of the income demographic, but it's highly correlated to it across 3 generations. And so when you talk about consolidation, a lot of these big platforms have basically locked up the consumer asset. And what we're seeing actively from a brand perspective is that people want to leverage platforms like Facebook because it allows brands to activate in a way that was never possible before. And so it's very empowering for brands. But again, and I think when we show certain data to them, they're all almost very surprised that they don't have a broader audience than they thought. Because in theory, they could say, hey, my product could be sold to anybody from a 25-year-old to a 55-year-old. It doesn't look that way. And so what I think a lot about is, how do I help a fragmented brand universe with their particular target population once they go outside of a Facebook or an Instagram where it's not as easy to target, and go find more of their tribe, because that starts to become really hard. But it's easy for me to understand why larger platforms do that, because once you have every household, you can do a lot with it. That is the asset today.
Frank, Rich, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good point around kind of different cohorts to target. I would say that the big thing on the Facebook side, we are seeing a shift from like this assumption or this presupposed belief of I know who my addressable audience is, whether it's men 25 to 65 or getting much more narrow to using data from the publishers like Amazon or Facebook and Google to oftentimes find out that your actual product is designed for someone very different than you originally thought. And so as opposed to jumping in with the assumption, they're using data to kind of spoon feed what their go-to-market should be. So who is their audience? And specifically, how do I best speak to them based on the value proposition I may have? So it is changing a little bit. I would say some of the traditional agencies are probably wrapping their head around that a little bit more because they were always designed to say, this is your audience, this is the persona of that audience, and this is what we're doing for them. It's kind of going the opposite now. We use data to inform them.
Okay, I'm going to ask just one question that gets asked at every Korean startup conference. What should Korean startups do to succeed in the U.S. global market? What are some 1 or 2 quick tips you can give to, since the audience is obviously Korean startups and trying to break into the U.S. Global market?
I think it starts with just questioning the underpinnings of your business. Does it make sense to raise money from U.S. investors? Does it make sense to actually try to port your business over to the U.S., right? Have you done enough in Korea to de-risk it from a U.S. investor standpoint? So that's number one. The second one would be really, how robust is your network? The most important thing about venture investing is to get the right introductions to the right investors who are looking for a company of yours at your stage and like what you have to say. And that doesn't really happen until you plug into events like this and into networks. I am very pro Los Angeles because I think for a lot of the Korean companies, it makes way more sense for them to come to LA first and then expand elsewhere versus coming to San Francisco and then striking out there because there's just too much money and too many short attention spans to really give you guys the time and the effort to help nurture you in that VC environment. I think the people who've shown up here, the people on the panel, is a testament of how wonderful LA is to support not only Korean startups, but Korean American startups. Just on this panel, these guys are amazing business people and investors in their own right, but they're also personal friends, and we hang out, we talk deals, and we just hang out and just have fun together. So I think that level of community and collegiality is something that LA has in spades, certainly within our community, that other large, built-out, kind of mature tech centers don't.
Do you guys want to add anything? You don't have to.
I think, this is for people that are just starting. I think this applies to any entrepreneur, whether you're Korean American, there's a great article called 1,000 True Fans. It's 2006, it's a blog post. It's basically, the idea is like, you gotta build Shake Shack before you can build McDonald's. You gotta build something that people just love. That's how you start. And as a founder, if you don't have that, you don't have a business. And so I would really just focus on that. Don't focus on people who like your product. Focus on people who love it. And if you don't have people who love it, then you should probably think of a different idea.
And that's advice not just for Korean startups, Korean American startups, it's advice for any startup.
Two of the things that I personally test for when I meet with a startup is, don't solve for a problem because it's out there. Solve for a problem that people will pay for, right? Like, you gotta kind of understand that's a nifty solution because it's a solution that someone is going to pay for, right? And then just the other part of it is this concept of the half-life, right? Like, you want to make sure that you're building something so wonderful that people are talking about and absolutely love it, because as your business grows, the more it becomes mass market, you're going to lose whatever magic in a bottle you had when you first launched. So it's that concept of a half-life. At every stage of growth, you're going to lose half of that passion initially, so you better start off with a very strong initial core that you can build off, use that as momentum to build a very large business, because nothing is ever sustainable over a long run.
And we have time for a few questions. If any of you want to ask any question, I'll open the floor.
But by the way, one person I forgot to thank personally was Young Kim from Troy Gold, who actually spent a lot of time with our startups. So thanks, Young. So Han, who's the former president of ESL back there, why don't you ask us a question?
One of the things that I think is changing, and I would like to get your perspective, is how do you reach a younger audience that are now more socially connected, and they're going to be your future consumers?
Frank, you want to take it?
Not on Facebook. Kidding, but not on Facebook. Luckily we have Instagram. We have marketers that tell us, I'll give you a great example. We have a client that literally sells products that were designed for like 40, 50, 60-year-olds, and they're trying to come up with new products that will kind of increase the longevity of their business, so they want to go after younger audiences. Going back to my point earlier where there's this assumption where I know my audience, I'm going to go after them, I'm going to have, Facebook gives me all these levers to figure out with the identity graph who I should pinpoint. That's flipped, and so if that company were to be here today and we were to chalk, we would say, don't think about targeting a customer that's specifically young, but lean on some of these really successful companies, Amazon, Facebook, and Google, around machine learning and AI, to let them find the exact audience or the targets that are applicable for your products and services. And you do this by sharing signals around your customers, or the first cohort of customers that may have purchased from you. And we have done remarkably well over the last few years with high precision, finding out exactly who your target customer is. The hopes there is they might be younger based on that original question, but you just don't know. And so I'm kind of not directly answering your question, I realize, but I guess don't go in with a preconceived notion of who your audience is. Lean on machine learning from Google, from Facebook, from Amazon, and we do a pretty good job of finding the customers for you. And then Instagram is younger, TikTok is younger.
No more questions.
It's a friend of ours.
Peter, you have a question?
Yeah.
Let's just introduce Peter the right way. Peter was the founder of Hudson Denim, and now he has an accelerator where he's really helping early brands under his Golden Circle brand and essentially incubating them. Right? Hopefully, it's some minimal justice, but fire away or correct me.
So these days we have more data than ever before, right? And we have the ability to go after more people than ever before. So we can get very targeted on who we go after, or also very wrong on who we go after. So with no understanding all that, would you guys say it's easier to market today than it was yesterday or in the past, based on those facts? And again, because in the past, you kind of had an idea, and then you had TV or radio or billboards, magazines, kind of just blew it out there. As many people as you possibly could, and they may be your customers, they may not be. A magazine may be sitting in a doctor's office, and could be like a 90-year-old woman, and you're selling surfboards or whatever. So having all that, would you say it's easier to market today than it was before?
I think, from my perspective, and I'll be brief, the barrier of entry is much lower now. I mean, decades ago, there were some long-term sustainable brands, and it was just hard to penetrate. It is more fragmented. You had mentioned earlier, you may have the Amazons that eat all commerce, but there's always going to be this long-tail brands that, get specialized, and they can be very successful in their particular category. I think the barrier of entry is lower, and that's why you see a lot of companies and their valuations and their path to success is oftentimes much faster than some of the companies from a few decades ago.
Yeah, I would tack on to that a little bit by saying certain parts of it are much easier. So getting started on being able to do targeting because of Facebook and Instagram, not having to have giant analytics teams to be able to get up and running, that's a serious enabling technology that wasn't available to small brands before. Also, I'd say, on some level, it's easier to create a brand in that I think what resonates today with people is almost more a reflection of the customer. Whereas when I was growing up 20, 30 years ago, it was more like you had to create this aspirational lifestyle that didn't really exist that people wanted to lean into and become. Now it's just, hey, let's just create a reflection of real life, and that's actually what resonates. So on some level, that is actually easier. But what's harder, I think, is getting that to scale, because the audiences are small. And so it's easier to get started, it's much harder to scale.
And related to that, I think it's harder in that if you listen to a lot of startups and a lot of businesses, it's more expensive. So you may be targeting a certain customer and you've identified exactly who you're going after, but so are your competitors because the market is just more efficient. Because it's more efficient, it's more expensive. But yeah.
I think if you try to be so targeted early on, then you might miss the point of building a mass market brand, right? Like, because what's going to happen is you're going to target, it's very expensive. You're going to grow because your algorithms are dead on, and Facebook's doing a great job serving up your ads to people who you want to target. With that being said, I think you miss out on two things. One, just how to be a good general marketer when you start, right? Because you're young, this is probably your first business, you're building a brand. There's a lot that you learn just by hustling as opposed to having Facebook do your work for you. And then the other benefit is, suppose you do achieve some level of success being so targeted with your marketing, you're going to hit a ceiling when you run out of that demo and you don't know how to make that leap into more kind of a broader audience, which is where you need to be if you want to get to an exit that excites VCs.
I have a question. It kind of relates to the question about reaching a younger targeted audience. I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on new game streaming platforms, Mixer, Twitch TV, YouTube gaming now, Facebook gaming, and how to work with brands and connect brands into this space. Because that's my wheelhouse, and I'd love to hear your guys' advice on how to do that.
Talk to Han.
I mean, unless Frank has anything,
I wish I
I would. Han is Mr. ESL, esports consultant. He's raised a Mexico gaming fund, so definitely have a conversation with him. All yours, Han. You're welcome. Anyone?
So we are out of time, and we want to get you out of here so you can have a productive afternoon. Well, first, thank you so much to each one and all of you for attending our event today. Thank you to all the partners that we introduced earlier, and thank you especially to the heroes of today, the startups that did a great job pitching. Why don't we give them a hand? Yeah, the entrepreneurs are the heroes. They're the ones that are changing the world. And we hope to see more crossover collaboration between the nations and entrepreneurs from different countries. And especially, we want to see more Korean entrepreneurs thriving globally. Thank you very much. Okay, if you want to get in touch with the startups, we want to make one email accessible to everyone. Is that okay, James?
Yeah.
Yeah, James. James at bsuccess.com.